I'm Ann, 32, and until last week, I was the operations manager at Meridian Tech for 9 years. I gave that company everything. Weekends, missed birthdays, even passed on my dream vacation to Japan. I believed in loyalty. I believed in security. When my boss called me into that glass conference room, I never expected those words. What they didn't know was that I had been preparing for this moment all along. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever felt undervalued at work. Trust me, you'll want to see how this unfolds. My journey at Meridian Tech started back in 2013 when I walked through those sleek glass doors as an entry-level data analyst. Fresh out of my MBA program, I was hungry to prove myself in the corporate world. The company was growing rapidly, specializing in enterprise software solutions, and I saw unlimited potential for my career there. The first 2 years I worked harder than anyone, arriving at 6 in the morning, leaving well past 8 at night. My dedication caught the attention of my superiors, and I climbed the ladder quickly. Junior analyst to senior analyst, project coordinator to assistant manager, finally operations manager overseeing a team of 20 people. Each promotion felt like validation that hard work and loyalty were truly valued. Samantha joined the company about a year after me. We bonded immediately over our shared work ethic and became close friends. She was in marketing while I handled operations, but we collaborated often on cross-departmental projects. We celebrated each other's successes and supported each other through challenging times. Samantha was the one person I truly trusted at Meridian. "You're the backbone of this place," she would tell me. "They'd fall apart without you." And truthfully, my contributions were significant. I implemented an inventory tracking system that saved the company $2.5 million annually. I streamlined our customer service protocols, reducing response times by 60% and significantly improving satisfaction ratings. I even developed our disaster recovery plan that the board praised as revolutionary. The company recognized my value, at least initially. 3 years ago, I received the Meridian Excellence Award, presented by Marcus himself, our CEO. A tall, imposing man with prematurely silver hair and a practiced smile, Marcus loved being the face of the company. He thrived in the spotlight, taking credit for innovations that came from the teams beneath him. "Ann represents everything Meridian stands for," he announced at the company gala, as I accepted the award: dedication, innovation, and loyalty. Those words would later taste like ash. I had opportunities to leave. Headhunters called regularly with offers that would have increased my salary by 30, sometimes 40%. A direct competitor tried to poach me with a director position and stock options, but I declined them all. I believed in Meridian. I believed in the relationships I had built. I believed Marcus when he talked about the company as a family. The executive team consisted of Marcus as CEO, Richard as CFO, and Barbara as HR director. Richard was calculating and cold, always looking at spreadsheets rather than people. In meetings, he referred to employees as resources or overhead. Barbara came from a major corporation known for aggressive cost-cutting. She performed Marcus and Richard's directives with efficient precision, rarely questioning the human impact of their decisions. The first signs that something was changing came about 6 months ago. Closed-door meetings became more frequent. When I walked by the conference room, conversations would abruptly halt. Budget reviews that normally included me were conducted without my knowledge. Resource allocation discussions happened without the input of department heads. Samantha noticed it too. "Something weird is happening," she whispered one day over lunch in the courtyard, careful that no one could overhear. "Marcus and Richard have been meeting with some young guy. Very hush-hush." I brushed it off initially. "Probably just a new client or investor," I said, though. A knot of unease began forming in my stomach. Then came the requests for detailed documentation of all my processes and procedures. For the annual audit, Barbara explained, not quite meeting my eyes. I complied, creating comprehensive guides for every aspect of my job. Looking back, I was writing the manual for my replacement. The morning it happened started like any other. I arrived early, responded to emails, and checked in with my team. Then my phone rang. Anne, could you join us in the executive conference room? Barbara's voice was formal, lacking our usual friendly rapport. Sure, I replied, feeling that knot of unease tighten. What's this regarding? We'll discuss when you arrive, she said before hanging up. As I walked toward the conference room, I saw Marcus, Richard, and Barbara seated at the table, along with a young man I didn't recognize. He looked about 25, wearing an expensive suit that seemed slightly too big for his frame. That's when I knew. But nothing could have prepared me for the coldness of what came next. The glass door closed behind me with a soft click that somehow sounded final. Marcus gestured to an empty chair across from them, not standing to greet me as he normally would. Anne, please sit down, he said, his voice carefully modulated. I took the seat, noticing how the young man avoided eye contact. Barbara had a folder in front of her, her reading glasses perched on her nose, looking every bit the HR professional about to deliver unwelcome news. There was a moment of silence before Marcus spoke the words that would end my 9-year career. Anne, after 9 years, we're eliminating your position, he said calmly, as if commenting on the weather. This decision is effective immediately. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Eliminating my position, I repeated, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. I don't understand. The operations department is essential to our business model. Richard cleared his throat. We're restructuring the operations team. It's nothing personal, just a business decision. But the young man's presence made it clear this was very personal. Barbara slid the folder across the table. This contains information about your severance package. As per company policy, you'll receive 4 weeks of pay, and your health insurance will continue until the end of the month. 4 weeks. After 9 years of dedication. The insult was stunning. Who will be handling my responsibilities, I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Marcus gestured to the young man beside him. This is Kyle, my nephew. He'll be taking over as the new Director of Operational Excellence. Not eliminating my position at all. Just eliminating me. Kyle finally made eye contact, a flash of guilt crossing his features before he composed himself. I'm looking forward to building on the foundation you've established, he said, clearly rehearsed. Kyle has an MBA from Wharton. Marcus added, as if that justified everything. My years of actual experience apparently meant nothing compared to a family connection and a prestigious degree. I see was all I could manage. Richard looked at his watch, making it clear my time was already up. Barbara will escort you to collect your personal belongings. For security purposes, you'll need to be out of the building within 30 minutes. 30 minutes to pack up 9 years. Barbara stood a signal that the meeting was over. No one shook my hand. No one thanked me for my years of service. Marcus was already checking his phone. I'll need your company phone and laptop before you leave, Barbara said as we walked out. And your access card, of course. The humiliation of being escorted to my office was almost unbearable. Colleagues I had worked with for years quickly averted their eyes as we passed. Word travels fast in an open office. The whispers were already starting. My team looked shocked as Barbara and I approached my office. Melissa, my assistant, stood up with tears in her eyes. Please return to your work, Barbara instructed everyone. Anne is leaving the company today. I entered my office for the last time, Barbara hovering in the doorway, like I might steal something. I had anticipated this moment, thankfully. 3 weeks earlier, after noticing the strange meetings and being excluded from decisions, I had gradually taken home my personal items. All that remained were a few photos, a plant, and some books. Barbara handed me a cardboard box. You have 20 minutes. As I packed, I could see my team through the glass walls, looking confused and upset. Samantha appeared at the entrance to the department, her face a mask of shock. Barbara intercepted her before she could approach my office. The final indignity came as I was escorted to the exit. We passed the company achievements wall where my picture hung with the Excellence Award. Would they take that down too? Security waited at the lobby. The guard Jim, who had greeted me cheerfully every morning for 9 years now, looked uncomfortable as he accepted my access card. I'm sorry, Anne. he said quietly, genuine in his sympathy. As the glass doors closed behind me, I stood in the parking lot, holding my small box of possessions, the spring sunshine feeling oddly inappropriate for the moment. My car was parked in its usual spot, third row, where I had arrived that morning as an operations manager and would leave as, unemployed, discarded. What Meridian Tech didn't realize was that this wasn't the end they had planned. Because in my home office, locked in a secure cabinet, was a folder. A very special folder containing every email, every memo, every record of the activities I had discovered over the years. They thought they were getting rid of a problem. They had no idea they had just created one. The drive home from Meridian Tech that day was a blur. I remember sitting in my car in the parking lot for several minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened. 9 years of my life, gone in 30 minutes. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the modest 3-bedroom house I had purchased 4 years ago looked different somehow. When I bought it, the mortgage had seemed like a wise investment, a statement of stability backed by my secure position at Meridian. Now it represented a financial obligation I wasn't sure I could meet. Inside, I placed the sad little box on my kitchen counter and just stood there. The silence of the house in the middle of a workday was disorienting. My phone buzzed with a text from Samantha. "What happened? Are you okay? Call me when you can." I couldn't bring myself to respond yet. What would I even say? Instead, I wandered through my house feeling like a stranger in my own life. It was only 2 in the afternoon. I should be in a meeting right now, or reviewing quarterly projections, or mentoring my team. The shock gave way to waves of emotion that crashed over me in the days that followed. Anger at the callous way I was discarded, fear about my financial future, humiliation at being escorted out, and a profound sense of betrayal that cut deeper than anything. By evening, Samantha called for the 3rd time, and I finally answered. "They're saying your position was eliminated due to restructuring," she said, her voice low, like she was hiding in a supply closet to make the call. "But Kyle was in your office before the end of the day, rearranging furniture. It's disgusting." "Marcus's nephew," I said flatly. "That explains it," Samantha replied. "Everyone is shocked. Your team is completely demoralized." Over the following days, more information trickled in from Samantha. Kyle was making changes immediately, taking credit for systems I had implemented. Marcus had sent a company-wide email thanking me for my contributions and wishing me well in pursuing other opportunities, as if leaving had been my choice. He told the department heads that you had been planning to leave for months, and they accelerated the transition, Samantha reported. He's rewriting history. The betrayal deepened with each new revelation. The practical realities of sudden unemployment hit hard and fast. My severance would cover bills for maybe a month. Health insurance would expire in 2 weeks. I had some savings, but not enough to feel secure in the current job market. I began applying for positions immediately. My resume was impressive, but the job market for operations managers was competitive. Interviews were scarce. When they did happen, explaining my departure from Meridian became an uncomfortable dance. "It says here you were at Meridian Tech for 9 years. Why did you leave?" one interviewer asked. What could I say? That I was unceremoniously replaced by the CEO's nephew. That wouldn't reflect well on me, even if it was the truth. 2 weeks after my termination, I met with Jessica, an attorney friend from college, at a coffee shop downtown. "They can't just fire you without cause," she said after hearing my story. "Actually, they can," I replied. "Montana is the only state that requires cause for termination. Here in Washington, it's employment at will. As long as they don't violate discrimination laws, they can fire anyone for any reason or no reason at all." Jessica frowned. There might be other angles. Implied contracts, good faith violations, especially with your history there. But pursuing legal action would be expensive and uncertain. And there was another factor I hadn't mentioned yet. That evening, alone in my home office, I unlocked the cabinet that contained what I had come to think of as my insurance policy. The folder was actually several folders meticulously organized by date and subject matter. Digital backups existed on encrypted drives stored in different locations. It had started almost 2 years ago. I wasn't looking for trouble. I was just doing my job. As operations manager, I had access to a wide range of company data necessary for coordinating between departments. During a routine audit of vendor contracts, I noticed discrepancies in the payments to a company called Apex Consulting. The amounts were significant, but I couldn't find any deliverables associated with them. When I raised the issue with Richard, he dismissed my concerns. "That's handled directly by executive management," he said curtly. "It's not within your purview." That should have been the end of it. But the following week I accidentally received an email meant for Richard from Marcus. It referenced the Apex arrangement and mentioned keeping the payments structured as discussed to avoid detection. It raised red flags I couldn't ignore. So I began to pay attention and document. Over the following months, I discovered a pattern of concerning activities. Meridian was systematically misclassifying employees as contractors to avoid paying benefits and taxes. Safety violations in the server facility were being covered up rather than addressed. The company was recording foreign revenue in ways that appeared designed to evade proper taxation. And there was more. Emails between Marcus and Richard discussing how to phase out the older workers without triggering age discrimination suits. Documentation of the company knowingly using unlicensed software. Evidence of them inflating numbers to investors. I hadn't been looking to become a whistleblower. I loved my job and the company I thought I was working for, but as the evidence mounted, I knew I needed to protect myself, so I documented, carefully, legally, making copies of emails I was legitimately included on, taking notes of meetings I attended, saving files I had proper access to as part of my job. Now, staring at the accumulated evidence of years of corporate misconduct, I faced an ethical dilemma. What should I do with this information? Using it for personal gain or revenge would make me no better than them. But allowing these practices to continue unchallenged felt like being complicit. I called Jessica again. "I need to tell you something in confidence," I said. "As my attorney." 2 years earlier, I was working late on a Thursday evening. Most of the office had cleared out, but I needed to finalize quarterly operations reports for the board meeting the next day. The numbers weren't adding up in the supply chain expenditures, and I was determined to find the discrepancy before presenting. I discovered that a vendor, Apex Consulting, was receiving monthly payments of $20,000, but I couldn't find any contracts or deliverables associated with them. As operations manager, I should have been aware of any consulting work related to our department, but this was completely off my radar. Confused, I checked our vendor database and found Apex had been added 6 months earlier, authorized directly by Richard, our CFO. That was unusual, as new vendors typically went through a vetting process involving multiple departments. The next morning, I brought it up casually with Richard before the board meeting. "I noticed payments to Apex Consulting while preparing the quarterly reports. I can't find what services they're providing us. Do you have that information?" Richard's reaction was immediate and telling. His expression tightened, and he glanced around to see who might be listening. "That's an executive-level arrangement," he said dismissively. "It doesn't concern operations and shouldn't be in your report. But it's affecting our departmental budget," I pressed. "I need to account for it." "Remove it from your report," he said firmly. "That comes from a different allocation. I'll handle any questions about it if they come up." That should have been my first warning sign. But the real revelation came the following week when an email mistakenly landed in my inbox. It was from Marcus to Richard, with the subject line, "Apex Arrangement." I almost deleted it, assuming it was sent to me in error, but the first line caught my attention. "We need to keep the Apex payment structured exactly as discussed to avoid detection. The Wyoming entity is working perfectly as a pass-through. Johnson is happy with the arrangement and says the offshore transfers are clean." I stared at the screen, reading and rereading those sentences. This wasn't just unusual accounting. This sounded like deliberate financial deception. That email became the first entry in what would become my documentation folder. I didn't know yet what I was documenting or why, but instinct told me to keep a record. Over the next few months, I kept my eyes open. I didn't actively snoop, but I became more attentive to irregularities, and I found them everywhere I looked. During a routine review of human resources data for staffing projections, I noticed a pattern. Employees over 50 were being systematically moved to positions that were later eliminated. It was subtle enough that each individual case seemed like a legitimate reorganization, but the pattern was unmistakable. I found an email chain where Barbara and Richard discussed refreshing the talent pool by finding ways to transition out the higher salaried legacy employees. Barbara had expressed concern about potential age discrimination claims, to which Richard replied, "That's why we do it gradually and individually. No pattern, no problem." In the facilities department, I discovered reports of electrical issues in the server room that violated fire safety codes. The proper repairs would require shutting down servers for 48 hours, which would impact service levels. Instead of fixing, the issue management had simply buried the reports and told maintenance to do band-aid repairs. The most concerning discoveries involved financial reporting. Through my operational oversight of international divisions, I found evidence that Meridian was using complex accounting tricks to shift revenue between countries, apparently to reduce tax liabilities. Profits earned in high-tax regions were somehow being recorded in regions with more favorable tax rates. Then, there was the treatment of workers. Employees who should have received benefits were being misclassified as contractors. Overtime was going unpaid through an unofficial policy of voluntary extra hours. Women and minorities were consistently given lower performance ratings than their white male counterparts, affecting their compensation and promotion opportunities. Each time I found something concerning, I carefully documented it. I never accessed any systems I wasn't authorized to use. I never hacked emails or broke into accounts. Everything I collected was information I had legitimate access to as part of my job. I created a secure digital storage system for sensitive documents and kept physical copies in a locked cabinet at home. I noted dates, participants, and exact quotes from meetings. I forwarded relevant emails to a personal account I had created specifically for this purpose. By the time I had been documenting for a year, the evidence was substantial and disturbing. The company I had dedicated my career to, that I had believed in, was engaged in systematic, unethical, and potentially illegal behavior. I wrestled with what to do. Going to Marcus or Richard was obviously pointless. They were the architects of these problems. The board of directors was a possibility, but several board members had close personal relationships with Marcus, and I wasn't confident they would take action. I considered anonymously reporting to regulatory agencies, but feared it would be traced back to me. I needed my job. I had a mortgage, health insurance, financial responsibilities. So, I continued documenting, telling myself that I was just creating insurance in case things went bad. I wasn't planning to use the information. It was just protection. Then came a Wednesday morning when Melissa, my assistant, came into my office looking troubled. "Anne, I think you should know something," she said quietly, closing the door behind her. "I overheard Richard and Marcus talking about reorganizing the operations department. They mentioned something about bringing in someone from outside to take things in a new direction. I thought you should know." That was when I began preparing more actively. I updated my resume. I discreetly reached out to contacts in my professional network, and I made sure my documentation was comprehensive and secure. After my termination, when I shared some of this information with Jessica under attorney-client privilege, her eyes widened. "Anne, this is more serious than wrongful termination," she said. "Some of these activities could trigger federal investigations. Securities fraud, tax evasion, labor violations, discrimination. This is major corporate misconduct." "What should I do with it?" I asked. Jessica thought carefully before answering. "That depends on what you want. If your goal is just fair treatment for yourself, we could use some of this as leverage for a better severance package. If you're thinking about the bigger picture, there are whistleblower channels that might be appropriate." "I need to think about it," I said. That night I received a text from Samantha. "They're shredding documents in Richard's office. Something big is happening. Be careful." It was time to make a decision, about what to do with everything I knew. Jessica's law office was in a converted Victorian house downtown, its exterior charm belying the serious work that happened inside. We sat in her private consultation room, the documentation I had gathered spread across her mahogany desk. "This is remarkably thorough," she said, examining the organization of my evidence. "You've documented everything meticulously." I had to be careful, I explained. I needed to make sure everything was obtained legally through my normal job duties. I never accessed anything I wasn't authorized to see. Jessica nodded approvingly. "That's important. Whistleblower protections typically don't cover information obtained through unauthorized means." The term whistleblower made my stomach tighten. Until that moment, I hadn't fully accepted that this was the path I was considering. "I don't want to destroy the company," I said quietly. "A lot of good people work there. My friends, my former team." "Then what do you want?" Jessica asked. It was a simple question with a complex answer. Justice, certainly. Accountability for the executives who had built their wealth through unethical means. A fair severance package that reflected my years of service. But also something more abstract. A restoration of values, perhaps. A world where loyalty and hard work actually meant something. "I want things made right," I finally said. Over the next week, Jessica and I developed a strategic approach. We would proceed ethically, legally, and methodically. No revenge tactics, no vindictiveness. Just a careful application of pressure where it would be most effective. The first step was reaching out to other former employees who might have experienced similar treatment. Through professional networking sites, I connected with Michael, who had been the procurement director before being abruptly let go the previous year. They told me my position was being eliminated. Michael confirmed when we met for coffee. Then they hired someone younger for basically the same role with a different title. I always suspected it was because I questioned some of the vendor relationships, especially Apex Consulting. That name again. Michael had noticed the same irregular payments I had. Diana, who had been a finance manager, had a similar story. After I raised concerns about the international accounting practices, I was sidelined from important projects. 6 months later, I was gone. They gave me a decent severance package, but made me sign an NDA. "Did you sign it?" I asked. "Yes," she admitted. "I needed the money, but I've regretted it ever since." The three of us formed an informal support group, sharing experiences and information. It became clear that there was a pattern of removing employees who asked too many questions or showed too much integrity. With Jessica's guidance, I prepared a careful approach to the situation. Direct confrontation would likely backfire. Instead, we would apply pressure, strategically giving the company an opportunity to correct its behavior before escalating to regulatory involvement. The first step was a carefully worded letter to the Meridian Board of Directors excluding Marcus and Richard. It outlined specific concerns about corporate governance and questionable practices without revealing the full extent of what I knew. The letter was professional, factual, and free from emotional language or threats. "The goal is to alert the independent board members who might not be aware of these issues," Jessica explained. "They have a fiduciary duty to investigate credible allegations of misconduct." Next, I prepared documentation packages for relevant regulatory agencies ready to be submitted if the board failed to respond appropriately. Securities and Exchange Commission for the financial reporting issues. Department of Labor for the worker classification violations. Occupational Safety and Health Administration for the safety concerns. Internal Revenue Service for the tax matters. "We won't file these immediately," Jessica advised, "but having them ready gives us options." I also reached out to Thomas, an investigative journalist who specialized in corporate accountability stories. We met at a quiet restaurant outside the city. "I'm not looking for a headline-grabbing exposé," I explained after giving him a general overview of the situation. "I'm hoping the company will address these issues internally. But if they don't, the public deserves to know." Thomas nodded. "I understand. I can work with you on this whether it becomes a story or not. Sometimes just knowing that press attention is possible can motivate corporate boards to take action." Throughout this process, I was careful to maintain ethical boundaries. I refused to leak any confidential customer data. I wouldn't disclose trade secrets unrelated to the misconduct. My goal was accountability for wrongdoing, not destruction of the company. Meanwhile, Samantha continued providing updates from inside Meridian. Kyle was struggling in his role, making basic operational mistakes that were affecting service delivery. Customer complaints were increasing. The stock price had dropped 7% since my departure. "Everyone can see it was a mistake to let you go," she texted. "Even Barbara seems uncomfortable with how things are going." The timing of our next steps was critical. The annual shareholder meeting was approaching in 3 weeks. The board would be meeting 2 days prior to prepare. That provided a natural deadline for them to respond to our concerns before we would need to escalate. Jessica helped me craft a follow-up letter to the board this time, with more specific details about the financial irregularities and a request for a meeting before the shareholder event. "If they refuse to meet," she said, "we'll know they're not taking this seriously." 2 days later, I received a response from Patricia Reynolds, the lead independent director on Meridian's board. She requested a confidential meeting the following week. "This is a good sign," Jessica said when I forwarded the email. "Patricia has a reputation for integrity. She previously served as a federal prosecutor specializing in corporate crime before joining the private sector." We prepared thoroughly for the meeting, organizing the evidence into clear, concise presentations. I practiced responding to potential questions and objections. Jessica refined the specific requests we would make for addressing the issues. The night before the meeting, I received an unexpected call from Barbara. "Anne, I know we're not supposed to be in contact," she said, her voice tense. "But I think you should know that Marcus and Richard are planning something. They've been in closed-door meetings all week with the company's outside counsel. Whatever you're doing, be careful." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, surprised by the warning. There was a long pause. "Because what happened to you wasn't right," she finally said. "And because I'm starting to see things I can't ignore anymore." The next morning, as I prepared to head to the meeting at the neutral location, Patricia had suggested I felt a strange sense of calm. 9 years at Meridian had led to this moment. Whatever happened next, I was ready. The Portland Harbor Hotel's private meeting room offered a panoramic view of the waterfront, though I doubted anyone would be admiring the scenery today. I arrived 30 minutes early, with Jessica wanting to settle my nerves and review our approach one final time. "Remember, stay factual and unemotional," Jessica advised. As we arranged our materials on the polished conference table, "This isn't about your termination anymore. This is about corporate governance and accountability." At precisely 10 o'clock, the door opened. Patricia Reynolds entered first, a distinguished woman in her 60s with silver hair and a poised demeanor. Behind her came 3 other board members I recognized. Lawrence Chen, a venture capitalist who had been with the company since its early days. Danielle Washington, former tech executive turned investor. And Robert Griffith, a retired judge now serving on several corporate boards. To my surprise, Marcus and Richard followed them, in looking considerably less comfortable. Barbara trailed behind, clutching a portfolio to her chest like armor. Last through the door was Andrew Wilson, Meridian's outside counsel, whom I had met only once during contract negotiations with a major client. "Thank you for coming, Miss Walker," Patricia began formally once everyone was seated. "We've reviewed your letter and take these concerns very seriously." Before I could respond, Marcus interrupted. "This meeting is unnecessary and potentially damaging to the company. Miss Walker is clearly disgruntled after her termination and is making unfounded accusations." Patricia's expression remained neutral. Nevertheless, the board has a fiduciary duty to investigate credible allegations of misconduct. Miss Walker has provided specific concerns that warrant discussion. "She's violating her confidentiality obligations," Richard interjected, glancing at Andrew for support. Jessica spoke up. "My client has not disclosed any proprietary information or trade secrets. Everything she's presented was obtained through her authorized access during her employment and relates to potentially improper activities." Andrew frowned, but didn't contradict her. "Perhaps we should hear what Miss Walker has to say," Danielle suggested, directing a pointed look at Marcus. I took a deep breath and began the presentation we had carefully prepared. I started with the financial irregularities showing the pattern of payments to Apex Consulting and the evidence suggesting it was being used as a pass-through entity for questionable transactions. Richard's face reddened as I displayed an email where he had explicitly discussed keeping these arrangements off the radar. Marcus maintained a stone-faced expression, though I noticed a muscle twitching in his jaw. Next, I presented the evidence of worker misclassification, systematically underpaid employees, and the apparent targeting of older workers for elimination. Barbara looked increasingly uncomfortable as I detailed how HR policies were being manipulated. At one point, she glanced down at her own notes, unable to meet my eyes. Robert Griffith, the former judge, asked several pointed questions about the documentation. And you obtained all of this through your normal job duties? Yes, I confirmed. As operations manager, I had authorized access to these systems and communications as part of my responsibilities. When I moved to the safety violations and the decision to ignore fire code issues in the server room, Lawrence Chen leaned forward with concern. That facility houses our clients' data. If there was a fire, the liability would be enormous. Exactly, I agreed. Yet when the issues were identified, the decision was made to conceal rather than correct them. Throughout the presentation, I maintained a professional demeanor, focusing on facts rather than accusations. I wasn't there to attack individuals, but to expose systematic problems that needed addressing. After I finished, Marcus attempted to regain control of the meeting. This is a selective and misleading presentation, he insisted. Miss Walker has taken routine business decisions out of context to paint them as improper. This is clearly retaliation for her termination. Which brings us to an important question, Patricia interjected. Why exactly was Miss Walker terminated after 9 years of apparently excellent performance? Marcus's prepared answer came quickly. We were restructuring the operations department to improve efficiency. It was a business decision. Then why was her position immediately filled by your nephew Patricia? Asked bluntly. The room went silent. Marcus clearly hadn't expected the board to have this information. Kyle has outstanding qualifications, he began defensively. He's been with the company for 3 weeks and has made several critical errors, I stated calmly. Customer complaints have increased 22% since my departure. The stock price has dropped 7%. These are verifiable facts. Andrew, sensing the meeting was not going as planned, attempted to redirect. Perhaps we should focus on finding a resolution that satisfies all parties. That's why we're here, Jessica agreed. My client isn't interested in damaging the company. She wants to see these issues addressed appropriately. What exactly are you asking for? Robert inquired. I exchanged a glance with Jessica, who nodded encouragingly. First, a severance package that fairly reflects my 9 years of service and the circumstances of my termination, I began. Second, a commitment from the board to investigate the issues I've raised and implement appropriate corrective actions. Third, protection for current employees who raised concerns, particularly my former team members, who are being pressured to cover up operational problems. And if these terms aren't met, Marcus challenged, then we'll have no choice but to bring these matters to the attention of appropriate regulatory authorities, Jessica replied calmly. The SEC, Department of Labor, OSHA, and IRS would all have jurisdiction over different aspects of what we've presented today. Andrew leaned over to whisper something to Marcus, whose expression darkened further. This sounds like blackmail, Richard snapped. No, Patricia corrected firmly. This sounds like an opportunity to address serious issues before they become public matters. As board members, we have an obligation to investigate. What happened next? Surprised everyone. Barbara suddenly spoke up. The documentation Miss Walker has presented is accurate, she said, her voice slightly unsteady but determined. I've been increasingly concerned about many of these practices, but felt I had no recourse to address them. Marcus stared at her in disbelief. Barbara, you can't seriously be supporting these accusations. I'm supporting the truth, she replied, straightening her shoulders. And I'm tired of implementing policies I know are wrong. Patricia took control of the meeting again. I suggest we take a short recess. The board needs to confer privately. As they filed out, leaving Jessica and me alone in the conference room, I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. This company had been my professional home for 9 years. Seeing its leadership exposed this way brought no joy, only a sense that something necessary was happening. That went better than expected, Jessica murmured once the door closed. Barbara's support is significant, and Patricia clearly came prepared. What do you think they'll do? I asked. They'll make a deal, she predicted. The independent board members can't ignore what they've heard today. The liability is too great. When the group returned 30 minutes later, the dynamic had visibly shifted. Marcus and Richard looked subdued. Patricia took charge of the meeting. Miss Walker, we appreciate you bringing these matters to our attention, she began. The board has decided to form a special committee to conduct a thorough investigation of all issues you've raised with the assistance of independent outside counsel. She outlined the terms they were prepared to offer: a significantly improved severance package, including a year of salary and benefits, a non-disclosure agreement that specifically excluded communications with regulatory authorities if the internal investigation proved insufficient, and a commitment to review all recent terminations for similar patterns. Additionally, Patricia continued, we've determined that leadership changes may be necessary. Effective immediately, Marcus and Richard will be placed on administrative leave, pending the outcome of the investigation. Marcus opened his mouth to object, but Andrew placed a restraining hand on his arm and shook his head slightly. When we left the meeting, I walked out on my terms this time, head held high. No security escort, no cardboard box of belongings, just the knowledge that accountability was finally happening. In my car, my phone began ringing almost immediately. Samantha's name flashed on the screen. What did you do? She asked when I answered. Marcus and Richard were just escorted out by security. The whole office is buzzing. Justice, it seemed, had a certain poetry to it. The weeks following the board meeting brought rapid changes to Meridian Tech. A press release announced that Marcus and Richard had taken leaves of absence to pursue personal interests while the company conducted a comprehensive review of operational practices. Corporate speak, for they're in serious trouble. Patricia Reynolds was named interim CEO, bringing her prosecutor's eye for detail and ethics to the role. Her first action was to hire an independent firm to conduct a thorough investigation of all the issues I had raised. The results were consequential. Within a month, both Marcus and Richard had officially resigned from the company. The board's special committee issued a statement acknowledging significant lapses in corporate governance and financial controls and outlined a remediation plan. Regulatory investigations followed despite the company's efforts at internal correction. The SEC opened an inquiry into the financial reporting practices. The Department of Labor reviewed the worker classification issues. OSHA inspected the server facilities and issued citations. For me, the aftermath brought unexpected opportunities. As news of the situation discreetly circulated in industry circles, I received calls from companies known for their ethical business practices. One in particular, Westlake Systems, impressed me with their transparent approach and commitment to employee well-being. We need someone with your operational expertise, their CEO Gabriela Martinez told me during our interview. But more importantly, we need someone with your integrity. I accepted their offer to become their new operations director, with a salary 30% higher than what I had been earning at Meridian and equity options that reflected a true investment in my future with the company. My former team members reached out as the situation at Meridian stabilized. Melissa had been promoted to operations team lead after Kyle proved incapable of handling the role. Several others had found new positions inspired by my example to seek out companies that valued ethics as well as performance. Barbara surprisingly remained at Meridian. Patricia had asked her to help rebuild the HR department with a focus on fair treatment and proper procedures. I have a chance to fix what went wrong, she told me, when we met for coffee several weeks after the confrontation. I need to take it. My documentation had given her the courage to speak up, she explained. I knew these things were happening, but I felt trapped in the system. Seeing you stand your ground showed me there was another way. The settlement from Meridian provided financial stability during my transition. Beyond the negotiated severance, the company reached an additional agreement with former employees who had been unfairly terminated, including Michael and Diana. The terms were confidential, but the compensation was fair. Perhaps the most meaningful outcome was the opportunity to reshape my professional identity. With Jessica's encouragement and support, I launched a side business as a corporate ethics consultant, helping companies establish whistleblower programs and ethical business practices. What had begun as a personal ordeal transformed into a mission to prevent others from experiencing similar situations. "You've turned a betrayal into a calling," Jessica observed as we worked on the business plan. She had become not just my attorney but a true friend and now a business partner. The journey wasn't without its challenges. There were nights I still woke up reliving the humiliation of that termination meeting, days when the anger returned unexpectedly, moments of doubt about whether I had done the right thing. But those feelings gradually diminished as I built my new life. I came to recognize that Meridian's betrayal, painful as it was, had freed me from a company whose values no longer aligned with my own. The experience had revealed my strength and clarified my priorities. 6 months after my termination, I received an unexpected email from Thomas, the investigative journalist. "Thought you might want to see this before it publishes," he wrote, attaching a draft article titled "Corporate Accountability in the Tech Industry: How One Whistleblower Changed a Company." The piece detailed the transformation at Meridian following the exposure of its unethical practices without identifying me by name. It described how the new leadership had implemented sweeping changes from ethical business practices to improved employee treatment. The company's stock, after an initial drop, had stabilized and was beginning to climb again as investor confidence returned. Reading it, I felt no vindication or triumph, only a quiet satisfaction that things had been made right. The article concluded with a quote from Patricia: "Sometimes it takes one person with courage to transform an entire corporate culture. Meridian is a better company today because someone cared enough to hold us accountable." That evening, sitting on my deck, watching the sunset, I reflected on the lessons of the past year. I had learned that loyalty must flow both ways to have meaning. That documentation is not paranoia but prudence in corporate America. That speaking truth to power requires both courage and strategy. But most importantly, I had learned about my own resilience. The company that thought they were discarding a problem had instead unleashed a catalyst for change. My goodbye gift hadn't been revenge, but redemption. For the company, for my colleagues, and ultimately for myself. If you've ever faced workplace injustice or wondered whether standing up for what's right is worth the risk, I hope my story gives you courage. Sometimes the hardest moments in our professional lives become the most transformative. Have you ever had to make a difficult, ethical choice at work? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Remember, your integrity is your most valuable professional asset. Thank you for listening, and I wish you strength on your own journey to workplace justice.